All right, I think we're good to go. Sorry again, I totally messed up on my calendar. It happens, but it's good because we'll still have time to cover everything that I plan to. I know that some of you had actually signed up for, I think it was last month's webinar that ended up being canceled. It was for the guided instruction components for Clover. I just wanted to bring it up because what I'm going to show you today is very similar to what I would have shown then. Remember, if you've been through previous trainings, through previous open webinars, you know that the same lesson plan format can usually be adapted to different sections, different modules, different skills. When we're talking about the Max Phonics lesson plan, for example, I can use it with the alphabet, with the blends, with the digraphs. And when we're talking about the multi-syllabic word lesson plan, which I'm about to go through with you, we can use it with Clover, we can use it with spelling rules, we can use it with prefixes. So even though last month's session was canceled, like I said, it's going to be very similar because it will be the same steps of the lesson plan. What would change is the wording that you use here and there. Last month, we would have been talking about syllable types on our lesson plans. This month, we're going to be talking about spelling rules in our lesson plans, but the steps are the same, standard, Orton Gillingham as usual. So today, let me make sure that I am recording so that I can send it to you later. Yes. And I will be showing several different documents that I have. So as usual, when I send you the recording, I'm going to send you all the materials that I've been pulling up throughout the session. This session will be about 45 minutes long, just a heads up. So the first thing that I want to review, go over with you once again, is that lesson plan, that template of the steps, the basic steps that we need to follow. So I'm going to go into my account right here. And I'll go into the material section. And right now we're going to be dealing with MaxWords. This first file, zoom in a little bit. This first file is the one that I always go to first. And remember that this is the lesson plan that can be adapted to all the different modules. So once it opens up, we'll go over the steps. And then I'll show you some samples of how I go about writing my lesson plans. And then we'll review some extra information, some sample worksheets that I've come up with, some sample activities that I come up with, because what we have here in front of us right now on the screen is the basic 7 steps that a multi-syllabic word lesson plan would have. I've added some additional exercises here at the bottom, and then I've come up with more along the way. You never want to limit yourself as to how much drill and practice you provide to the students. The more, the better. So yes, you have 7 steps on the basic lesson plan. That doesn't mean that you only do 7 steps. The more that you add, the better, because the more effective the lesson will be, and the more likely your student will be to really get, understand, and retain what you're teaching. So let's go over the steps one by one, and I'll repeat it. This lesson plan can be used with any module in MaxWords. Right now, we're going to deal with spelling rules. So I'm going to adjust my verbiage as we go to fit the spelling rules mold. So the first step is the visual drill. I'm going to read off of here, paraphrase a little bit. And what we're supposed to do with the visual drill is introduce the relevant skill, in this case, a spelling rule. So we're going to introduce the spelling rule by name, along with its definition or its meaning. You'll use index cards to make this introduction while showing them to the students, showing them the index cards. You should use several more index cards to expose the students to words that are relevant for that spelling rule. Let me show you some of my visual cards for the spelling rules. I have here my little packet for Clover. For spelling rules, I don't have them all made up, so I just have a few. Let me show you. I know I have the one for the first rule. So this is a sample of what my cards for the visual drill would look like. The spelling rule, this is the name of the spelling rule, the double F, L, S, or Z. On the back, I have the definition of that rule. In this case, it's that for one syllable words with a short vowel that end in an F, L, S, or Z, I'm gonna double the final F, L, S, or Z. Before I show you my example words, all of these are my visual cards. Notice that, or keep in mind that for every rule, there's exceptions. So there's 18 different spelling rules that are covered in the MaxWords program, in the spelling rules module. And for each of them, there's exceptions. What is important is to build the rule, to build the basic concept, because it's the one that will be encountered the most. The rule is the one that is applied the most. You can generalize it. And then you can address the exceptions later on. So my words will be obviously words that follow the rule, and I'm not gonna focus on the exceptions right now. So here, this would be the part that says you should use several more index cards to expose the students to words that are relevant for this spelling rule. I have here one syllable words with short vowels that have a final F, L, S, or Z. So the final F, L, S, or Z is doubled. This is my little deck for spelling rule number 1. And this is for step 1. All of these are my visual cards. Then we have step 2, which is the auditory tactile drill. Whenever you see auditory tactile, it's some sort of dictation that or pronouncing, reading of a word that will then require the students to trace it or write it. You can choose whether it's going to be tracing or it's going to be writing. So the instructions say, give 5 to 10 words to the students which are relevant for the spelling rule that we're learning. They will trace them on a surface. I wrote there some examples of what that surface might be. We generally speak about a tray with salt or with sand or with rice. If that's too messy, then you can do a Ziploc bag with shaving cream or hair gel or paint in it, or any sort of textured surface. What's important is that the students can actually, let's say this is my textured surface, that I can actually trace, feel the texture. And when my fingers leave the page, leave the surface, I can see the word or the letters that I wrote there. So for the auditory tactile drill, we're going to give the students 5 to 10 words, and then they're going to trace them on the surface and or write them on paper. Then for step number 3, which is the sound blending, excuse me, we're going to give them 5 to 10 more words. You can use the same words if you have a student that you need to kind of take it easy with. If you can challenge them, the more words that you add, the better, because again, we're learning about spelling rules. We want to see that rule applied in as many words as possible. So I suggest adding additional words. Every step that tells you to give the student words, use different words each time, or try to at least. So for step 3, we're going to give the students 5 to 10 more words, then follow this rule. And this time they're going to split the words into syllables or tap out the sounds in the words. They should also write them down, the words, syllabicate, and code them on paper. Now, let's think about this step again. I need to have the students split the words into syllables, tap out the sounds, and write them down, syllabicate, and code them. If you look at a word like this, you're not going to be able to split it into syllables. You can sound it out, but there's going to be certain words that you cannot. This is when you start encountering things that you need to switch up a little bit. And this will happen when you adapt this lesson plan to different modules. The basic steps will be the same, but some of them you'll see that it doesn't apply to the rule that you're going over right now. This is also relevant if we think about Clover or the vowel teams. I can sound out the vowel teams. I'm going to come up with really weird sounds. So for the sound blending, I would need to come up with something else, some alternative to this step where I can still introduce more words. I can still give another type of activity, another type of exercise, but not necessarily splitting the word into syllables because it's not relevant right now. And not necessarily sounding them out or tapping out the sounds because it might not be relevant right now. So what I like doing when it comes to different spelling rules, and it changes from rule to rule. Hold on one second, please. Sorry, just had to answer something real quick. So what I would do with this type of activity is come up with something else. For example, here, it's not for the spelling rule that we're talking about right now, but it's something similar. This is for the rule, which we'll talk about in a little bit, covering whether I should use CH or TCH at the end of a word. So this is sort of an activity that I came up with to replace the sound blending, which is not relevant for this rule. Here, I would just have the students complete the word and then reading. I'm not blending the sounds, I'm just reading the word, but I'm still forming the word. So I'm still having some sort of drill and practice applying the rule, what I've learned about the rule, just switching it up a little bit so that I don't have to split and tap things out when it's not appropriate. Then we have the fluency. That's step 4. The fluency, as usual, you're used to it from the phonics, from pretty much every single section of Max Reading, is where we time the students for 60 seconds to see how many words they can read correctly in those 60 seconds. For Clover and for spelling rules, you do have on the material section word sheets, word lists that you can print out and use. If you're advancing to the prefixes and suffixes and all of those, you might have to make up your own. For Latin roots, we have a word list. For Greek roots as well, it's just the prefixes and suffixes that don't have pre-made ones. So for the fluency, as always, we're going to use that list of words to time each student for 60 seconds. You can find those lists, for the most part, on the dashboard. And we're going to keep track of how many words the students read in total, how many mistakes they made. And at the end of the 60 seconds, we're going to give them a score with how many words they read correctly. Keep in mind that if your students are also using the software and are finishing those rules on their account, when you pull up the reports, there will be a spot for you to enter the fluency scores. So you can keep track of it on paper, but you can also go back to your online reports on the dashboard, see which rules they've completed, and after you time them, you can manually enter the score there and keep it there as well. Then we have step 5, that is the spelling dictation or word dictation and SOS. SOS stands for simultaneous oral spelling. That is, it's an exercise that's pretty similar to step number 2, when we were giving words to the students. But here, we want the students to repeat the word. We're going to ask them how many sounds they hear, and then they're going to write them down. That's a simultaneous oral spelling. You say it, they count the sounds, and then they write them down. I would suggest, again, 10 different words, or at least mix them up. The ones I used, some of the ones that you used in step 2, some of the ones I used in step 3, etc. Then we have step 6, which is the sentence dictation, or COPS. COPS is another strategy. This one has to do with writing exercises. So it's something that I suggest you incorporate anytime that you ask the students to write something. That stands for capitalization, organization, punctuation, and spelling. So on the sentence dictation, you come up with 5 to 10 sentences. If you need to keep it simple, do 5, do 3. If you can challenge your students, and your final goal should be to be able to reach 10 sentences, So you're going to dictate them to the students. They're going to repeat it back to you. That simultaneous thing is also happening. You're going to ask them how many words they hear. Once they answer, they're going to write that sentence down. Before they submit the paper to you, they're going to be writing it on a notebook or on a piece of paper, right? Before they submit it to you, they should check the cups. Did I capitalize? Did I organize my words, my ideas? Did I punctuate? And did I use the proper spelling? So cups, capitalization, organization, punctuation, spelling. And it can be used outside of Max Scholar too as well. It's a good self-check strategy before they submit any writing exercise. And then the last step of the basic 7-step structure is called Max Reading. I call it Max Reading or story or controlled readers if you compare it to the phonics. Here, we want the students to integrate word recognition, in this case, the words that have this spelling rule that we're going over, into text on a Max Reading chapter. Now, we don't have a one-to-one correlation saying, okay, if I'm teaching this spelling rule, this is a Max Reading chapter that I should use. But it's likely, or it's safe to assume that on pretty much any Max Reading chapter that I use, some word that follows the rule will be there. So you can either just finish or wrap up this lesson by having the student go to Max Reading, finish an entire chapter and do the exercises there, and maybe write down or list the words that they see, that they find that follow the rule that they were learning. Or what I would suggest is you can come up with an original story. Keep in mind that on this lesson plan, you've used the rules, you've used several words in different steps. You have a word list for the fluency. You have sentences that you dictated. So you have a lot of content that you could use to come up with an original story. It doesn't have to be long. It can just be a few sentences. You can have the students come up with their own story using maybe new vocabulary words that they heard in this lesson that they didn't know before. So again, you have the basic steps, but you can adapt it, you can switch it up, you can make it your own and adapt it to the student at hand as well. So those are the basic 7 steps. Then we have additional exercises. These are just random things that I've thought of. I've thought of more along the way, then I've given up on some of them as well. So it's up to you. You can come up with additional ones as well. This will help you enrich this lesson plan, make it a little bit more comprehensive, engage the student a little bit more, and give them more drill and practice. So some of the activities that I added was for the student to write or explain the skill in their own words. Have them make their own index cards. Your visual cards that you're making, have the students make their own. When reading a text, underline the words that have the spelling rule that we just learned. Work on new vocabulary. Have them build sentences with those vocabulary words. If you have the workbooks, complete the pages in the workbook. If there's worksheets, additional worksheets in the material section, print those out, have them do it. Again, the more drill and practice, the better. So quick recap of what I'm looking at right now. I went to the material section. I went to Max Words and I downloaded the first file. That's all I did up until now. And I'm going through the first page. Now, the second page and a few after that are a sample of what a lesson plan looks like when it's already written, when it's already planned. This sample is for the consonant LE syllable, so that's actually for Clover. And you can see it's the cards. Every box represents a card with the rules, with the definitions, with the words that I dictate, the words that I have them blend, the fluency scores that I give them, the words, additional words that I dictate, sentences that I dictate. Notice that here I left some spots for the student to come up with their own sentences. And on the Max Reading, I would choose later on what reading story I have the students go to. And then towards the end, you have an empty template. So this is what you can use to build your own lesson plan. Here's where you can decide, okay, this step is not appropriate. I'm going to reword it. Here is where I'm going to add another step, another activity. this is where you can switch it up. So now that we went over that, I want to also mention some of the additional materials that you have on your list. Remember that you'll have, for different modules, additional worksheets, the fluency list, tracking sheets, reading passages, etc., etc. I suggest you take a look at all the different things that you can get. But now, I didn't want to focus too much time on that. I want to show you how I go about writing my lesson plans and a few samples that I've already done. So first, I wanted to pull up my lesson plan that I wrote out for that first spelling rule, which is the double F, L, S, or Z. It's the one that I was showing you here. So I wrote it out first just to make sure that I got my wording right, just to make sure that I got the words that I wanted to get. Harder words, easier words, I make it as I want it to be. So here, my cards I already showed you, the name of the rule, the definition, my example words. So this is all step one. For the auditory tactile drill, remember here, I would tell the students the word and I would have them trace it in a surface and or write it on paper. When relevant, you can have them do extra things. For example, you can reinforce skills from the phonics. Circle every blend or every digraph that you see. Underline every short vowel. You can come up with those sort of extra things. Here, I just kept it simple. For the sound blending, remember, this is where I'm actually not going to split the words into syllables, not tap out the sounds, but come up with an additional alternative exercise to provide more drill and practice for this rule. On the fluency, this would be the scores that I give my students after I time them. Remember that you're just going to give them credit for the words that they read correctly. Then we have word dictation. This is where we're going to dictate them. They're going to say it back. They're going to count the sounds and then they're going to write it. Then we have the sentence dictation. You can do 5 and have the students come up with an extra 5. Or in my case, I came up with all 10, and the words that I underlined are the ones that I really want to drill down on because those are the ones that follow the rule that we're learning. And then I came up with a story, or I adjusted a story that I saw on the dashboard. And again, it includes many words, as many as possible, that follow this F, L, S, or Z rule. This is what the lesson plan will look like once it's done. The basic one. Of course, you can add more as you go. So how do I go about writing those lesson plans? Here I have the empty template. I deleted the instructions. I deleted everything that I didn't need. I just kept the basics there. So this template that I've started doing for myself is for the spelling rule, GE or DGE. So the way that I go about it is option 1. I go to the dashboard, go to the material section and see what I have for the GE or DGE. But probably what I'll do 99% of the times is I'll go to my Max and I'll just simply navigate as a student. So I would go to Max Words. If you have the workbook or the teacher manual, you can do the same thing, but on paper. And here I go to spelling rules. I find the GE, DGE rule, and I go screen by screen. This is what I would use to make my cards. So here, the J sound can be spelled GE or DGE. I'll use DGE at the end of a word directly after a single short vowel. So DGE after a long vowel. What I do here is DGE after long vowel. Of course, I would write a little bit more. I'm just trying to keep it short now. And I'm going to need another card. So I'm going to copy this. Because now I need for the GE. And for the GE, it's after a consonant or after a long vowel sound. So I have it. I would also make cards for each of those. So I have one card for the DGE, one card for the GE. Then I would write words. Where do I get my words? Here I have some. If I click OK next, I have several more. So I would use edge, forge, purge, large, merge, badge, mix it up with a GE and DGE, write the words down here and make my cards. Same thing for the auditory tactile drill. If I ran out of words in the software, you always have Google, your best friend, where you can find more. And there's several rules that don't have that many examples or that many simplified examples. You can go ahead and reuse words. Just make sure that you change the order so that the students don't just memorize the, edge, forge, merge, edge, forge, merge. They can actually identify the words and apply the rule. Same thing for the sound blending. For the fluency, I'm gonna not write anything until I have the chance to actually sit with the students and give them a score after they read for 60 seconds. Remember, we're gonna have a whole group of words. We don't wanna see how long it takes them to read them. We wanna see how many they can read in 60 seconds. It's not the same. This is all about reading nonstop for 60 seconds, and at the end, ending up with a score that is the amount of words that I read correct. Words that I dictate are listed here. For the sentence dictation, I generally just come up with 5 and then have the students come up with the rest. And then for the last step, like I said, I usually like coming up with my own story. Remember, I just go to my account and I click through, get more examples, get more ideas, etc. So I use the software as an additional material. So I have my list of materials and I have the software as its own material in a way. So that's how I write my lessons. Every time that you see me going over a lesson plan, a few minutes before the webinar, I spend some time doing these, and that's how I come up with them. Some take me a little bit longer, but usually that's how I do it. And now I want to show you another example of something that I came up with this is for the FLS or Z lesson. So I show you the initial 7 steps, I show you my cards, and I keep remembering that I've made other things. So this is another format that I can use to introduce the rule. If you don't like index cards, if you like more digital, if your students are remote, you might have to use PowerPoint or something like that. And here, these are my cards. The rule is the FLS or Z. This is what it stands for. These are my example cards. So this is a replacement to my index cards, my physical index cards. This is an activity where I would have the students complete the words in a way with the FLS or Z. This is what it would look like to begin with. You could print this out, this sort of worksheet out, and give it to your students, or just have them trace lines. If you're using Zoom, they have that feature where they can write on the screen, so they can do something like this. And then here I have sentences that I took out a word of each, and I would want my students to complete those words, ending up with something like this. So this is, again, more drill and practice that I've incorporated into my FLS or Z lesson plan. And then the last thing that I want to show you, let me make sure. Yeah, it is the last thing that I wanted to show you, is this short set of slides, once again, reinforcing what we've already seen. The Orton-Gillingham spelling rules, like I said, there's 18 of them introduced in the program and in the workbooks and in the teacher manual if you have them. Spelling rule, I mentioned it at the beginning, is a guideline that we use, a principle that we follow to help us spell words correctly. But like I mentioned, for every rule, there's an exception. Mostly it's going to apply. You can generalize, but there's always going to be a word that you say, this one doesn't follow the rule. Why doesn't it? No reason, it just doesn't. So that's why it's important to expose the students to as many words as possible that do follow the rule, so that easier for them when they encounter those words. And then it's easier to deal with the exceptions because you don't have to make real sense of the exceptions. You just have to make sense of the rule. So this is just like a quick review. This is what the student's workbook looks like if you have it for spelling rules. If you want to access it in the software, as you know, it's in MaxWords. It's the second module. These are the 18 rules that are covered there. I focused on this one, the first one. I briefly mentioned the GE and DGE. This activity that I mentioned was for the CH and TCH, where I have the students form different words, applying the rule. You can use magnetic tiles, you can use your alpha chips if you have them, your sound cards. Again, you can play around with what you have in the classroom already. And then here's another version of how I can introduce it. This would be my visual card, my examples that I pull up on my screen that I can share on my screen. Here are some exceptions. I decided to add exceptions at this point. Here's a little video. There's several videos online that you can rely on that help kind of tie things together. I like this girl. She has several videos.
A one-syllable word with a short vowel, if it ends in or FL, F or Z, that letter is double. You only hear one sound. It's just a spelling rule. We just need to know to double that letter.
So it's pretty much everything that we've been discussing. She just explains it in a more visually appealing way. Here is a sample of the fluency table of words. Activities that are similar to the software. This is actually a screenshot taken from one of the pages of the workbook. And then again, several other ones. The Y says I. For the spelling rules, you don't have to go in order, by the way. This is the order that they appear on in the software. You don't have to follow this order. You can pick and choose. So here I just put a few examples. You can come up with your own type of mini presentation. Here's another activity that she does with the GE and DGE. I had one. I don't know where I put it at this point, but I'll send you this and it's similar to what she does on the video. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. I see somebody's joining now. Do I know the woman's name? Yes, it's Sarah Reeds with a Z. Sarah, I can't remember if it's with an H or not. I think yes. So Sarah Reeds. I'm gonna put it in the, it might be a different spelling, but it's something like that. And she has a few of those spelling rules and activities. I like her, but there's millions of other people that do similar videos. So I suggest you use those as an additional resource. But that's pretty much what I wanted to go over, just understanding the steps, where and how I see that, oh, this step is actually not relevant right now, let me switch it up, and how I go about my process of writing the lesson plans, coming up with additional resources and additional activities, which again is the same process that I would follow for Clover, for prefixes, for roots, etc., etc. So I'm going to stop the recording right now, but I'm going to stay on for a few minutes in case there's questions. If not, you are free to go. Thank you for attending today. If you have questions, I'll stay on. You can unmute yourself and ask them or ask them in the chat box. Thank you and see you next time.